Well, hello ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the swarm of locusts. With today's episode, we're going to take this deep within the darkness and come across some truly frightening cryptid encounters. With me today is Formidable Escape. Be sure to check out his channel and show some love. A link can be found in the comments. Also, be sure to stab that like button, subscribe if you're new here, and hit that bell so you don't miss any uploads. So, with all of that out of the way, let's dive right in, shall we? For context, I live in the Midwest, in a suburban area. My boyfriend also lives in a suburban area, about 30 to 60 minutes away from me, depending on if I use either the interstate, highway, or city roads. That being said, I usually take the interstate there, then take the highway partway home, since the highway is only about a mile or so away from his neighborhood, and I take it all the way to the interstate. There is also another road I can take, a paved country road with one lane on each side of the road, with no streetlights. It eventually meets up with a few main streets, which are numbered roads we use where I live, and it will take you back towards the highway and city. I'm sorry for all the background about the roads, but I feel that it is important. I feel like my choice was a definite sign that the butterfly effect is always in works. Now, on to the story. Earlier today, I went to pick up my boyfriend and we basically hung out and binge watched a TV show that I recently got him into. Around 11 PM, he said we should probably go home since he works that morning. I agree and drive him home using the interstate with no problems. We kiss goodbye, and then I'm on my way out of the neighborhood and towards the street that takes me to the main roads. If I turn right, it's a straight shot to the highway. If I turn left, I can take it down the country road for a bit of a late night drive. I decided to take the latter. I turn left, then turn right at the stoplight and begin to drive through the dark country road. It was nice out, so I had my windows rolled down and my music up, just letting the breeze come in. It was pretty windy, so my car was swerving a little from the wind, and you couldn't see the stars or anything because the clouds were taking over the sky. I thought about switching on my high beams to see better, but the road was really curvy and had a lot of hills, and I was afraid I'd accidentally blind someone coming from the opposite direction. What happened next made me glad I didn't turn them on. On the left was a small patch of woods and overgrowth. To my right were wide open, empty fields, and in front of me was a hill. Towards the crest of a hill, I saw something beginning to cross the road. Something large and dark, with what looked like antlers on its head. I thought maybe at first it was a deer or even an elk, and I slowed down. But when I got closer, I realized something was wrong. One of the things that were wrong was that it was moving very slow, like it was hurt or something, and it didn't even glance at me. It just kept moving towards the patch of trees to my left, which I thought seemed really weird. I felt like it should have at least acknowledged the sound of my vehicle. The second thing was that this thing, this animal that I presumed was a deer or elk, it couldn't have been. It was at least the size of a moose, but that couldn't be right because where I'm from, there are no moose. We had deer and maybe some elk, but not moose. I felt a cold wave of dread wash over me as I watched this moose thing make its way across the road, and then it stopped and just looked right at me. It twisted its head so fast to look at me, I almost screamed. Its face was hideous. It looked rotten somehow, like it was withering away, and its eyes were so dark. I was scared it didn't even have eyes. There was blood dripping from where its mouth was, and I could see sharp teeth poking out from its lips as they were pulled back into a sneer. I thought about reversing my car and hightailing it out of there, but I was frozen. You know when the adrenaline kicks? They say you enter either fight or flight mode? Well, they don't tell you there's a third option, and that's to freeze, which is exactly what I did. I just stayed in place, hands still on the wheel, foot still digging into the brakes. I really don't know how long I sat there, just staring at this thing while it was staring back at me. But when it started towards my car, I honestly thought I was going to die. I couldn't move, couldn't blink, could barely even breathe. All I could do was hope and pray that I wouldn't be killed by some freakish moose-looking monster. Suddenly, that's when a pair of lights began to rise over the hill towards us, and as the other vehicle's high beams shined on this thing in the road, it let out this blood-curdling scream that didn't sound entirely human. It was a guttural and animalistic and sort of raspy. It's really hard to explain. I then watched this thing as it got on its hind legs and lurched itself across the road and into the thicket of trees and bushes, narrowly missing the other vehicle. I knew that this thing would probably come back out if I stayed where I was, so before I could give it a chance, I slammed on my gas pedal and gunned it out of there. I just wanted to get away as far as possible. Every dark curve or patch of trees made me feel so paranoid that I would see the creature again. All I wanted to do was go home and never, for the life of me, drive on that god-forsaken country road again. I eventually made it home safe, but shaken. And to cut a long story short, my family thought I was being hysterical and had just seen a deer. But I know what I saw, and I know that thing wasn't a deer. It couldn't have been. I'm so scared I'm going to come across this thing again, and I don't know if next time I'll be as lucky.
I want to share a Dogman encounter that I had in Wise River, Montana in 2015 at night around 11:30 p.m. I lived alone, and in this remote location, we don't have cable, so the only option is satellite TV. It was a humid summer night in July, and the TV was acting up, so I needed to go out and readjust the satellite, like usual. I took a flashlight and a gun with me. When I went outside, it was unusually quiet. I also purchased an AR due to other sightings I've had, but they weren't credible enough to chalk it up as a Dogman. So, when I went outside, it was so silent, it was unnerving. I brushed the thought off and went to the dish, which is in the corner of my yard. I went to work, making sure all the wires were alright, and tried pointing it at a different angle. Suddenly, I heard a small snap of a stick to my left, and turned the flashlight to that direction, and I saw a creature standing there. I got a good look at it, for what seemed like an eternity, but was for only about 10 seconds or so. I slowly backed off, and ran back to the house, and locked all the doors and windows. The creature was unlike anything I've ever seen before. When I shined the light at it, the first thing I saw was the head. It had cropped ears that pointed upwards. Its snout was narrower than a bear's and longer, and I could make out large teeth protruding from the jaw. Its eyes were a deep red shade that seemed to reflect off of the light I was pointing at it. The body was muscular and huge. It had long arms that appeared to be longer than its legs, broad shoulders that tapered into its skinnier waist. It was slightly crouched over when I saw it, with one hand wrapped around a small tree. I could make out the legs, which looked similar to a dog's legs. It had obvious hocks. Even with the crouched position, it was about my height, which is 6 feet. Standing up to full height, this creature could easily be 7.5 feet tall. The fur was black and thicker around the neck and chest, and the bottom half had significantly less. I don't know if it was aggressive or not, but what I know is I had a feeling of dread, unlike anything I've ever experienced. Was it just observing me, or stalking me? For a creature this large, it was deceivingly silent. It got within 15 yards of me without me noticing. All I knew was I needed to get out of there and not find out. I don't live on the property anymore, but after the event, I never had another face-to-face encounter. But I would hear sounds in the woods I couldn't explain. They would start off relatively quiet and work their way up to furious howls and screams, then back down to quiet again. I don't know if this was the same thing, because it could be local wildlife.
I live in West Virginia, but work between there and Eastern Ohio. I'm a vendor, and today something happened to me as I was strapping down my truck after I had just finished servicing a store. I was in Barnesville, Ohio, and was just securing my load in the back of the truck when I heard what sounded like, "Help me," from a wooded area next to the parking lot. Naturally, I stopped and listened to see if there was someone in need. There is a local Amish community, and a horse and buggy were parked about 30 feet from my truck. No one was inside. The sound was coming from the opposite direction. I listened, and sure enough, I heard it again. "Help me." It was clear as a bell. Help me. The thing was, it just sounded off to me, like it was just on the line of not being human. It reminded me of when you hear a crow talk, but with a higher pitch, as though if it were a child or woman, and not so exaggerated. I called out to the woods. Are you okay?" But I heard nothing. I heard it again, only this time, the horse was starting to snort and squirm. I finished strapping the truck down and got the hell out of there.
What I'm about to say is 100% true, so this will probably be a boring account compared to some of the other posts here. But I wanted to share this memory somewhere, and maybe get opinions on the matter. I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico. My mom would often take us camping in the summers. This particular camping trip was somewhere in the vicinity of Shiprock, New Mexico. My mother took my older brother Chris and myself camping often in those days when he was around 10 years old and I was around 8. We preferred isolated camping on BLM and MPS land compared to camping in managed grounds. So she'd usually find us a spot and make herself busy setting up the tents and pit, while Chris and I would scamper around and explore the area and generally try to be helpful. On this particular trip, we arrived in the middle of the day, and as Mom started setting up camp, Chris and I started to explore the area around our campsite. Being in the desert, it was really just stunted trees and sagebrush, so I hesitate to describe it as a forest. But the trees and brush were taller than me and provided a decent screen. I wandered down into a gully and came face to face with what I later described to my mother as a wolf kangaroo. It was crouched low, with long, slender arms reaching down onto the ground, and large pointed ears like a deer. The fur covering its body was sandy brown and patchy, as if it had mange. It had large orange gold eyes, and a snout like a wolf or a coyote. It bared its teeth at me and stood up. At its full height, it was the biggest animal I had ever seen. towering over us and the sagebrush. I had never been, and probably still have never been, as frightened as I was then. Chris and I started screaming for Mom to come to our rescue. Chris regained his senses before me, taking off running back up the embankment to the campsite. The wolf kangaroo turned around and sort of, I don't know, speed skated away from us through the brush and scree. Its legs were backwards like a dog's, and its strides took it far away and fast. Faster than any deer or antelope I had ever seen. After a split second of staring after it, in horror, I followed my brother up the embankment, screaming bloody murder for my mom. We were so frightened that my mom packed us up and back into the car and moved camps, conceding for once to stay in a managed campground. Chris and I were too scared to sleep in our own tent that night, and clung to Mom at the smallest twig snapping in the brush. So, that's my story. It's boring compared to some of the others here, but it's 100% true, and I wanted to share. I vividly remember the way the animal moved as it glided away from us into the desert, and the sheer and utter horror I felt looking into its face. Chris and I have never managed to find an explanation for what we saw that day in the brush.
While trading stories around a campfire, my friend recalled of an encounter he had while serving an LDS mission. My friend's mission region had a reservation within its boundaries. However, it was relatively far from where he was serving. On one occasion, him and his mission companion were asked to travel further than usual to meet with some investigators. This took them near the reservation. On their way home, their car ran out of gas, and it wasn't until late at night that they were able to continue the journey home. My friend, who was driving while his companion slept in the passenger seat, chose a different route that took him through some back roads in an attempt to get home sooner. He told us he was driving above the speed limit when he noticed movement in the woods lining the road. Because coyotes were common in the area, he took a little notice at first. Then he looked out the window and slammed on the brakes. The sudden stop jolted his companion awake, who immediately wanted to know what was wrong. My friend was shaken and said he would tell him once they got home. He asked him to say a prayer. By the time they made it home, his companion was dying to know what happened. My friend told him, "I looked down at the road next to the car and saw 6 men running on all fours, keeping up with the car. I was driving 40 miles an hour."
So about 8 or 9 years ago, I was asleep in my bed when I woke up for no reason. Right in front of me, on the corner of my bed, was a humanoid being. It was about 5 feet tall and really skinny, and it had bluish gray skin with a big head with what appeared to be caribou fur covering its face. The thing also had antlers. I was about to say what the hell, and it interrupted me halfway through my sentence by raising up one of its arms. When its hand was pointing towards me, I felt a strange energy surge through me like a wave, and right after that happened, I felt as if I was being dragged towards it. But the weird part was seeing myself in a half-awake state, sitting on my bed. Then everything went black. Suddenly, I was in what appeared to be a metallic hallway that was frozen and cold as ice. As I got up, I saw 3 of those beings floating from one doorway to another, extremely fast. When they reached me, everything went black again, and then I woke up, passing it off as a dream. But when I went over to the local game seller before he opened up a store, He told me that his wife claimed to have seen the same thing that I have. And when he described what she had seen, I had a weird feeling that I knew what he was talking about. The day after thinking about it is when the memory came back to me, and I went to tell him about it, but he didn't believe me. A few days to a week after I had seen that thing, I had another strange experience. It happened when I was home alone and watching TV. I was on the couch when I just had an urge to go to my room for no reason. But I went to my sister's room instead. As I made my way there, I saw a white light and what appeared to be mist coming from under my room's door. It took me a few seconds to realize this, as I was about to walk into my sister's room. So I decided to go into my room and check what was causing the mist to be coming from under my door. The first thing I saw was what appeared to be a bright white doorway in front of my bed, and on both sides of my bed were two men wearing all black. One of them appeared to be looking for something, and the other was standing guard next to the door. After a second or two of just staring at them in disbelief, they both looked at me, turning their heads in an eerie, synchronized fashion. I can't remember what happened after that. And suddenly, I was walking away from the kitchen, and I could hear the cabinets opening and closing, and a breeze of wind passed me as I walked back to the couch, not paying attention to anything until I sat back down.
I'm open to a lot of things, and was not at all skeptical when my friend mentioned that she had seen a shapeshifter on the local reservation she lives near. She delivers newspapers, and I helped her out for a month after she had some surgery done. We would talk about folklore and the customs and traditions because I've always been interested in that sort of thing, but never knew much about this particular tribe due to a lot of different things. She would tell me about seeing this big black dog on occasion, and when she would blink or look away, then look back, it'd be a woman. Always the same woman, just different ages. If it was anyone else telling me this, I would have thought trick of light or being tired, etc. But from her, I believed it. One night when I was with her, we pulled up to a man and a woman. We always offer papers to the homeless or people walking around because you'd be amazed at how happy some people get just by the gesture of it, let alone having a paper. So, they both accepted the paper, and when the woman grabbed hers, my friend tensed and I just froze. She was very nice in the 10-second interaction we had, but it was almost like she sent energy up my friend's arm and around the cab of the truck as if to say, I know you know, but don't mess with me. But it wasn't in a menacing manner, just pretty much like a warning shot of a gun. After they had walked away and we were heading up the road, my friend had stated that she was the wolf woman, and if I had felt what she did, and I nodded to her. We spent the next hour in silence, still feeling it roll through us. My friend got the full brunt of it, I'm sure, but I got a pretty powerful kickback as well. It was like light electricity dancing from nerve to nerve, creating goosebumps and shivers on occasion. It wasn't overall a bad experience at all, rather the opposite, just not really something you'd expect to happen as casual as it did. I really miss going on that route, but that was the first time in a long time that I was reminded of the universe being bigger than what we see.